Righty. Now, I've been promising to deviate a little from my usual content since I started this channel back in January this year. So I figured the best way to do that would be to really piss some people off and go for a debate that I know exists among combat fans but hasn't really been boned dry on this platform yet. The age-old relative upstart MMA versus the rise of traditionalist boxing debate. So I'm going to look at the 5 reasons why I think boxing is still the best combat sport on earth, while simultaneously shitting on MMA from a really great height. So here it is. Simple arguments. I will expand on this in further videos. Let's make some lifelong enemies. Alright, now I've laid the bait for simp hardcore boxing fans and MMA devoutists with their knives out ready to jump on me. In classic bad MMA math spirit, it's time for a switch. Now, while boxing can be a joy to behold when the style matchups and personalities blend perfectly to create something special on a given night, as a sport, boxing is somewhat limited in being centered on who has the better footwork and striking, notably punching diversity, speed, and timing. MMA, on the other hand, firstly, taking the obvious limitations set in to protect the fighters through the unified rules of MMA, so there's no back of the head strikes, which happen naturally, no shots to the bollocks, which happens so often I'm planning on starting a nut shot counter in my next reaction video. Eye poking, yep, that's really rife as well. Kneeing to a downed opponent, headbutting, and 12 to 6 elbows, grabbing the cage to gain an advantage. Damn, there's a lot, isn't there? To gain an advantage, or generally any blow that's intended to maim or do permanent damage. By and large though, MMA is a full contact combat sport that permits a range of fighting techniques, skills, and disciplines, of which there are so many to list, I'm not even going to go into it. So with the ability to use a range of knees, elbows, punches, and kicks to target different limbs, it allows for more diverse strategies from fight to fight. And that's before we can even get into how grappling and submission attempts affect strategy and the diversity of matchups. So usually you'd either have different striking styles fighting each other, or you'd pair a fighter that generally strikes with a fighter that was grappling orientated and seeing which style wins out on the day. The sport has basically evolved since to a stage where new age MMA fighters, while having a core discipline, usually must have some skill in all areas once they start getting to the big leagues. I could focus a video just on how MMA shits on boxing in the combat itself for being so diverse all day, and watching boxers clinch for half a round in most instances is enough to make me want to pull my fucking eyeballs out. But to summarize, MMA being so diverse and ultimately more unpredictable is consequently more exciting to watch on a more regular basis. I'm going to leave weight cutting and the issues around that, of which there are many, out of this for another video. However, I do consider how weight classes are set up in MMA and boxing play a massive part in why one sport is consistently on the rise in popularity and the other is falling deeper into the gutter with every passing day. Now, let's look at boxing first. Boxing has 17 recognized weight classes that are separated intermittently by 4 to 7 pounds. This is excluding heavyweight. That's 17 weight classes. Now, while I understand this is in place, of course, to protect fighters and to ensure that quote-unquote fair contests between men and women of varying size are able to fairly compete with each other, for me, this amount of weight classes is just so diluted and fucking confusing and so difficult to keep up with. It's really difficult to figure out who is able to fight who, and is often part of the point of contention for why so many fighters we want to see in a boxing ring often fail to get past the negotiation stage. MMA, in comparison across all major fight promotions, are split currently into 8 for men and 5 for women, if you include atomweight in one championship in Singapore. Now, while fighters are often choosing to move up and down to find more favorable matchups, with weight classes broader and with the majority of fighters competing in one division, it eliminates one of the major hurdles to getting fights made, which we'll get into later. More importantly, with the divisions much clearer and concise in major MMA promotions, It results in having clear champions in each division and a clear case for who is the best in a division and an even clearer path for who's chasing them. In boxing, you have 17 champions across weight classes, and that's before getting into the various organizations that further dilute this legitimacy. How many times have you seen a boxer with 6 belts strapped around every limb without knowing what the fuck they even mean? How is anyone who just has a casual interest in the sport supposed to care or understand what the fuck is going on? Now, while MMA organizations have a clear champion in each division, which for me adds to the champion's legitimacy, in boxing with 17 weight classes spread across 4 recognized organizations, so you've got the WBA, WBC, IBF and WBO, you can literally have 68 world champions at one time. And that's before you get into how many promoters and broadcasters there are to further dilute things, which again I'm going to get into next. In short, MMA is clear and concise, unlike this essay, in approach to weight classes and therefore more legitimate, as opposed to boxing, which in its approach to divisions is a diluted mess that has the opposite effect: illegitimacy and confusion. Alright, now this is a point that's often used to jab boxing fans in the eye, and the last point allows me to perfectly segue into this one. Now, due to the aforementioned dilution of boxing due to multiple organizations and promoters, we often never get the fights that we want, and just as importantly, when we want them. If we look at notable examples in recent history, we just have to look at the shit show surrounding Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, with that fight taking years to get done, the prolonged bullshit between Joshua and Fury, and now Fury and Usyk, and so on. Now, the argument can be made that with multiple organizations existing in MMA, yes, UFC is not the only one, you can argue that sometimes the best don't always fight the best in any given division. For example, in Bellator, they've got Umar Nurmagomedov at lightweight and Nemkov at light heavyweight, that both have strong cases for being seen as the best in their weight classes in the world and won't be able to test themselves in the UFC unless they sign, and that doesn't even consider the pot of murderers across the pond in Ryzen and One Championship. However, the majority of MMA fans in the West are UFC fans and tend to only watch these events. So with the UFC controlling matchmaking of all fighters under their banner and the ability to effectively call the shots, look what happened to Ngannou, for example, when he didn't play ball. On the flip side, this monopoly and bullying can be argued is bad for the fighters, and rightfully so. Again, that's the subject of another video, but as fans, this is ideal for us, as more often than not, the fighters rising through the rankings get to fight. Unless your boyfriend is the champion and you love a good cuck. Marab, I'm shouting you out. While this may end up changing if the fighters unionize or gain more rights in an amended Ali Act, for now, more often than not, we get varied matchups with a host of built stars we have connected, and again, due to reason number 4, which is a really big one for me. Now, I'm going to say this quite simply, as it's such an underrated and not often spoke about point, with the exception of a handful of boxing personalities that use their platforms well for self-promotion and personal branding, this pales in comparison to the way that MMA fighters in general connect with the fans and elevate themselves to this day. And in this age, it's just goddamn embarrassing. Alright, let's take a look at the prominence of fighters on Twitter and other media platforms that MMA fighters use to publicly squabble, on top of interacting with fans for our entertainment to build fights. The way that the UFC has used the Ultimate Fighter, the Contender Series, the Dana White, I'm looking for a fight, to get fans to know the fighters more intimately and build stars, is simply incomparable to how boxing now operates. The UFC also understands the era they're operating in, and the opportunity to build and know fighters more intimately before giving them a showcase adds more than just a star matchup. We get to know these fighters on an intimate level. Boxing on the whole is full of squabbling organizations that will never put their knives away and work together in taking advantage of opportunities like this, and consequently continues to fall further and further behind in being able to give a spotlight to stars before the platform to actually showcase their fights. It started with Sonnen, exploded with McGregor, and the UFC continued to use this model to further develop stars and draw attention to the sport on a regular basis. On top of this, with the amount of stars that are being built on the regular, I can watch an entire card and enjoy various personalities and stakes on display, whereas in boxing, who the fuck is on all these undercards? Most of us will agree that when we do tune in for an event, we do so just for that main event, and that represents the entire disparity between the two disciplines in my view. All right, finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the scoring system and daylight robberies. Now, this one is a bit of a reach, but I'm going to try to justify it here as best as I can, especially given the recent Kraus controversy and the growing belief that this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the boxing scandals in the UFC and MMA goes. Of course, the well-documented shit that has happened in Pride. There does seem to be a shocking robbery in the UFC on almost a weekly basis. I can think of Li Jingliang versus Rodriguez, Wei Li versus Rose 2, Khalil Roundtree versus Jacoby, Jones and Reyes is a famous one that everyone seems to always refer to, Pimlet and Gordon not too long ago, Jesus, that one was terrible. And those are just the most recent fresh examples in my mind. I could go on. The fact is that in all these fights, at least cases can be made for one fighter winning over the other. Maybe not in Pimlet's case, that was just an outright robbery. In boxing though, the level of robberies we have seen over the years are simply inexcusable by comparison. If you are basically a boxer fighting a home event fighter, if you don't get a KO, you can literally win every round conclusively, and more often than not find yourself on the end of a ridiculous losing scorecard with no explanation or attempts at fixing anything. Corruption is rife in the UFC, and while MMA is far from perfect on this, organizations like PFL and the Smart Cage is at least showing potential to things to trend in the right direction, with open scoring, which I actually don't agree with, also being talked about. The scoring criteria in MMA is fucking inconsistent, but as a regular watcher of both sports, with MMA being so multifaceted and harder to score, it seems much more glaring and unforgivable in boxing, and it just stinks. Alright, now I was going to do some honorable mentions, but frankly I don't want to spoil another potential video in a subject that is so nuanced. Fuck you boxing, I hate you and you need to change. I'll see you all soon for the upcoming UFC 287. It's a massive one stacked from top to bottom. And I just want to mention before I go, this channel has almost doubled in subscribers overnight and I'm just blown away. To everyone who's liking, subscribing, getting involved, thank you so much. We're really trying to build something here. I appreciate everyone who's doing so. If you could sub if you're new, and throw up some likes and comment, that would be absolutely amazing. All the best to everyone, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great one.